And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining Cybersecurity. This is Sean Martin, your host, where I get to talk to cool people about cool topics. And someone I met not too long ago in Las Vegas at Black Hat at a great networking event. Mr. Peter, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Sean?
Doing very good, very good. You've been on the road traveling a lot since then.
I have.
Multiple places, multiple. I don't even know what you were doing, but maybe we'll get into some of that.
Yeah.
Um, but we had at that dinner we were together. We had a lot of interesting conversations and some real down to earth, in my opinion, views on what security looks like, operations, AppSec. Um, yeah, vendor relations with CISOs, you name it. I
Yeah.
think we touched on a lot of stuff there, and I'm thrilled to pick at a few of those things today. And who knows, maybe we'll have a chance to have a few chats. Before we get into it, maybe your role as a CISO at AlphaSense, and maybe a brief overview of some of the things you've done leading up to that
Sure.
role.
Uh, so I'm currently the CISO, also CIO at AlphaSense. So I own security and IT, which is interesting. It's a good way to get in a fight in your own brain. Um, so, and
I love your
prior,
story.
that's right. It took all of like 3 days to get to that point. Um, Prior to that, I was the CISO at Own, which was acquired by Salesforce. Prior to that, deputy CISO at Clear, like at the airports. I was the managing partner of an 80-person boutique consultancy for 2 years. Prior to that, deputy CISO at Disney and deputy CISO at Fox, first head of cloud and cloud security at Fox, and then bucket of different technical and security roles at Ameritrade. Co-founded a couple startups, exited two, probably not as big exits as I would have hoped, but exited nonetheless. And Yeah, I've been kind of on the tech side, CTO, CIO, CISO, CITO once. Tried that on. uh, and so yeah, I think that I actually think that's part of what kind of grounds a little bit of my viewpoints
Mhm.
in kind of security, and the realism is like having lived and breathed kind of the pressures of the different aspects of a business, um, kind of really takes the wind out of the sails of kind of traffic cops. Or as actually, I was at an event last night, and it was a Yankee game. You have a
There
Yankee
you
hat
go.
on,
All right.
and a guy caught a ball. The crowd booed at him because it was a home run from the White Sox. So he threw it back on the field. And then some security person decided this was like their mission and had a field day and like kicked him out of the game.
Well,
And you're like, this is the exact kind of thing you want to avoid as like a CISO, right? Like there is context to what occurred there. Like, sure, it wasn't the greatest decision, but like there is context there. This guy was not there. He was not making a scene otherwise. There was nothing else going on. And like Lord knows what happened to that person. But
yeah.
I'm just like, this
Off
is,
camera.
but this is like that
Yeah.
kind of um there is no place for zealots in security. It makes a mess real fast, and it was just like the exemplification of that last night. Which was funny because I'm at an event with like, I don't know, 50 other CISOs, and we're all watching this in the suite, right? And this is our job, and we're all like, that's crap. Like what is that? Right? Like, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm surrounded by good CISOs. This is
There
good.
you
This
go.
is good.
Yeah, like a little
Yeah.
common ground there. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. So you mentioned a lot of different roles, but and you highlighted the fact that you were in a lot of different roles that keep you grounded, and but you also mentioned a lot of different industries and sectors and
Yes.
size of organizations. And I'm wondering because there's been a lot of talk. Of course, you hear it. I'm sure that CISOs need to know the business and they need to
Yeah.
know the market and the customer that they're serving and the risks that come with that and be able to speak that language while also understanding the technology aspects of it and translating the risk into how that impacts operations and impact to the business. And So all those different roles, all those different sectors, also all those different size organizations, how do you how do you shift your view? How do you get that understanding? And maybe is it a general understanding business? It's a core set of things you need to know that applies to everything, regardless. Or I don't know. Maybe some thoughts on that, just to kind of
I
kick things
think I think there's a couple of things. One, I think it's funny because I'm going to say something and I bet you CISOs who might be listening are going to dispute what I say, but like um, you have to be uncomfortable and comfortable in being uncomfortable. And I think that a lot of CISOs feel like they're comfortable being uncomfortable. But the reality is, a lot of CISOs are comfortable in emergencies. Emergencies are not the same as being uncomfortable, right? Emergencies, actually, I think a lot of CISOs like emergencies because emergencies are very easy. It takes kind of everything. So now I'm going to get a lot of hate mail, but they're not easy. But
I know where you're going. I know where you're going.
from a strategic and mindset standpoint, you're very clear eyed. You go into kind of like training you've had. You facilitate priorities really quickly and critically, and you take action. And there's like a dopamine loop that goes along with being in an emergency, which I know again might sound weird to listeners, but like there is. Um, way back in my career, I was actually an EMT trainee, so like I've run the gamut. Like there's probably a personality trait here that we're unearthing, but um, at the same time, there is the like uncomfort and discomfort I'm talking about, which is like kind of being out of your zone of genius, not really knowing, having to kind of like learn on the fly, figure stuff out, um, becoming an expert in a day on things, kind of stretching all day long. Um, that kind of like marathon type training exhaustion that occurs. And I think that is one of the biggest traits, right? I think there are different types of folks who gravitate to this role and leadership roles, and I think there are people who they're kind of more like fixated on problem solving and fixing things and holding standards and things like that. There's people who are, you know, like their zone of genius is very technical and they feel like at a certain point I can't grow any more technically, so I manage. And there's people who very much manage but they don't want to do, and everything in between. And the reality is, to have been in as many environments as I've been in, you have to be comfortable kind of with the fact that like there is no ideal mix. You're going to walk in and every minute, every day, what skills are coming to the forefront and how you have to handle that is shifting, right? And like if you're not comfortable with that, it's very hard, right? And I think there are people who, you know, are very well suited for like small startup life, and there are people who are very well suited for big corporate only, and like trying to shift around there is going to be too uncomfortable for them. Um, and I think that kind of answered your question, but I'm not sure if I
It
did.
it does, and it actually leads me back to a time when I was building product, and the whole I was a program manager. The whole point of my role was to be comfortable with ambiguity and
Yep.
lead a team through that. And it's easier said than done, right? Because
Yes.
you don't know what's coming where and where the hiccups are going to be and who's involved. And of course, we're all people, so personalities and work ethic, you name it, it all comes into play. And of course, same for a CISO, working with the team and the business and threat actors and the like.
Well, and I
Yeah,
think that the when I say being comfortable with being uncomfortable, I think it's we all have a propensity when we're uncomfortable to find comfort. But I think to your point of like comfort with ambiguity or being uncomfortable or being comfortable with being uncomfortable is no, you have to lean the other direction. Like I could go and just say like I'm gonna go and like code a way to go sniff out secrets all day, and I would love that, right? But that's not doing my job, right? I would have a hell of a lot of fun, but that's not doing my job. And so like there is an internalization of kind of when it gets uncomfortable, fighting your instinct to kind of run towards what you find comfortable.
Yeah. And I think another trait in the industry, I don't know if it's changing, maybe your thoughts on this as well, but kind of being the level of comfort and versus discomfort. I think generally we're looked to as being experts in cybersecurity. And it's, we have a question, what's the answer, right? And it's
Yes.
hopefully because it's tech, it's 0 1, black and white. What's the answer? Not always reality. And so we see a lot of change, and of course, we see a lot of transformation over the years from desktops to cloud to
Yeah.
we have AI and all this kind of mobile and AI and all this, um, where leaders don't understand cyber, leaders may not understand AI, leaders may not understand um, automation and orchestration with agents, regardless if AI is built in or not. And I'm just wondering how do you as a CISO, kind of tapping into some of the other roles, help educate the business and business leaders of here's what you need to be aware of. You think you might know what you're talking about. You think you might have the idea of how this is going to shape the business, but here are some of the things you need to consider as well.
So I think that there's the, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this, but I'll tell you how I deal with it. I would say that uh, I think it's a really important for leaders to have a trait of um, going deep, right? Which may sound like the opposite, right? But there's two ways to lead, right? And sometimes you rely on others and you rely on your kind of circle of experts, right? So like, look, I am the first person to say like, I don't know everything there is to know about legal. I don't know everything there is to know about HR. There are places like I work with all the time in my career, but I've really never played like in those zones, and I quite frankly don't really have a deep interest in playing in those zones. But when something is material to me, right? I don't particularly have a great interest in HR, but insider threat falls under me. I have to deeply understand how insider threat works. And there is something to say that I don't have to understand it as deeply as my head of insider threat, but I have to understand it deeply enough. And so I think what people tend to miss when something like AI is coming around that's so ubiquitous, right? Is that it's going to be ubiquitous to our world, right? And just like our business is ubiquitous to our world, or using basic computing apps is ubiquitous to our world, if I'm going to lead people through that, I need to go deep. And I might have a different angle at going deep than, say, someone who's the CMO. But I would also have the expectation the CMO is going deep and that we are going to have a commonality in being able to speak to each other in the things that are common amongst our verticals, usually tied to understanding the business and what is important to the business. And then you need to have that breadth across everything else, but you have to be willing to dive deep and lean into those places of breadth where it matters to the business, right? And so if you're in a, my favorite thing in the world is like, if you're in a highly regulated business and you don't understand compliance and regulations, you probably shouldn't work at a highly regulated business, right? Like it's core to what you do. So if you're not leaning in and learning about it, you're making way more work for other people, right? And part of your job as a leader should be to remove hurdles and to simplify and keep things fixed. And that's really hard to do if you don't understand these core components of your business. And so to me, I think like when you see these big tech revolutions, to your point, they're ubiquitous now, right? Like name a company that doesn't have stuff in the cloud. Name a company that doesn't have a like mobile presence. It's like you have to lean into those things then because they are part of your business language now.
Yeah, yeah, and I like the point you make with respect to removing roadblocks and keeping things simple. I think a number of the things we talked about when we met in person were along those lines. CISO leading their own team, so not the broad business aspect, but just more of what are all the things I'm being pitched,
Yep.
what are all the problems I'm being told I have. How does that relate to reality? How does that relate to how I drive my team? And you mentioned threat intelligence. I'm doing a lot on AppSec, so AppSec's in my head, and I think we talked a little bit about AppSec as
Yeah.
well that day. So what are some of the things that you think your peers or the role in general, even yourself, as you continue to learn, right? We're always
Yeah.
learning. What are some of the things you think we dig into that add complexity to our own lives as a team of security practitioners that perhaps we should rethink or reconsider?
I threat intel is one of my favorite things to talk about. Threat intel should be helping all of us. All the threat intel vendors are about to get mad at me. Threat
There
intel
we go.
should be helping us. However, the idea that there is generalized threat intel flies in the face of what the definition of threat intel is, right? And we see that across a large swath of security products, right? There is this um, idea of kind of cross application and broad purview. And don't get me wrong, the community within security is critically important. And the fact that we do share information and share understanding is critically important. But my problems have overlap with your problems, but they are not the same problems. My stack is not your stack. Who cares about attacking us is not the same as who cares about attacking you, except when everyone's being attacked, right? Which does happen. But like, generally speaking, there are distinct differences. And I think one of the biggest distracting things is not understanding those differences and what applies to you and what doesn't. And I think that happens in tools, in the way that vendors present it to us. I think that happens in information. I think that happens in the idea that we're going to platform everything. Like the thing that actually works is what works. And that sounds like I said nothing. But what I mean by that is if I like to take a lot of things that we do in the digital world and kind of take them out into the real world and shop them around and think about them through the lens of the real world. And um, one of my favorite things that I see people who are less experienced in security do is put like 47 locks on the door. And you're like, look,
Right.
one, maybe two.
40 is good. 40 is good.
Four, yeah, right? Like it was just those last seven, right? And so I like to think about it, and it's like if you go to the real world and you think of every single way you've ever been screened to like get into an event or something, right? And you stacked all of those things up in a row and said, okay, go get into this event, you would absolutely hate it. And 90% of it would be meaningless. But in a lot of places, we do that in the cyber world. And we do that out of a place of like fear and kind of like we don't know where the boogeyman's coming. But part of that is self inflicted because we spend a lot of time looking at that large nexus of information instead of understanding what we actually have and what is the best way to protect it, right? And if we start to dig down into kind of more simple principles around what we actually need to protect, um, it starts to simplify our lens. And the other thing is, you also start to understand that there are things that um, are like commodity. I'll give you a really weird, perfect example. Um, I should probably care if a laptop gets popped as a CISO, and I do. Everyone who's listening who thinks I don't, I do. Um, but if I'm at a company where the majority of people who are walking around with laptops don't really ever touch the data, right? Um, I probably realistically put an EDR in those laptops, tell them if it hits a certain number of signals to just wipe it, sandbox it. It's going to ruin Sally's day, but whatever, right? and that's it. Like I could go do a whole bunch of more things, and I'm not saying I wouldn't depending on the company, but if those laptops are not really going to hold any significant data, right? Maybe they're just all the laptops in the fleet are just people walking around with sales decks doing pitch meetings all day. Okay, it's public information, right? They're on the road. They're not connecting into our network. It's right, like, and we tend to ignore those things and have this quote unquote like best practices playbook, and you know, whose practices? Is it the best practices for us, or is it just you read about this somewhere and this is how you secure a laptop, right? And it goes back to it's like no one would ever be like, this is how you secure such and such event, and then like just have like a line of 47 things outside, right? um and so and I think it's one of the airports are an interesting and incredible thing, right? um there's really heavy security at certain airports and things still go on, and there's really light security at certain airports around the world and nothing ever happens. You know what? Well, most people are on vacation in like the Caribbean. They're not thinking about doing bad things, right? Like the threat nexus is different, right? And so I think we have to understand, really deeply understand that as security practitioners.
And is that a matter of, I mean, because there's no lack of frameworks, no lack of um, yeah, standard policies you might follow. Certainly, no lack of regulations that set specifics and also broad things we have to look after. But is it more of a operational view of what really matters? Because you're talking about, I don't care if the laptop, I do, but I don't care if the laptop gets popped.
Yeah.
It's because you've put it in context of your business, and
Yes.
you've set, because you're also the CIO, set your set your environment up to be operating in a way that it's probably not as impactful as perhaps some other organizations. So I'm assuming you've learned that, and maybe is there? You mentioned the word principles. Are there a set of principles that guide you? And if so, can you list some of those that maybe shape what you're talking about versus frameworks and policies and regulations?
So I like to look at similar principles to principles I think of when I think of managing an organization, right? There's a lot of complexity in managing an organization. So I think about context, knowing the context, understanding the ownership. Then I start thinking about things like no two people should worry about the same thing at the same time, right? Um, Other principles are that correlate there are things like if no one is doing it and no one cares, it probably doesn't matter. Right? Like and kind of starting to go through that, right? um and the thing that's always impressive to me is, you look at vendors and tools. um I've speaking, I've had lots of experiences. I've absolutely have had tools that are brought in, the homeowner, I like to call it the homeowner special, right? Where it's like people just keep going back to Home Depot and buying more tools. They still don't know how to wire their house, right? It's still going to burn down at the end, but fine, more tools will help, right? um but there's so many tools and they're sitting in that closet, and I've literally lived through the occasion of like realizing like this tool hasn't been on for like 2 months and no one knew. If that tool has not been on for 2 months, do you even need that tool? Was it doing anything? Right. Um, and I'm not saying it depends. Again, the context matters. Maybe it matters, right? Um, but the reality is, if you can't answer that question, like why do you have that tool, right? Um, and that's I think one of the principles. Like I have an interesting education compared to many CISOs. And I had one mentor, and his rule was I'll leave out the expletive, but like if you don't need it, get rid of it. Right? That was hit like one of the things I still take to this day. And I think we just need to simplify in a lot of places. Um, I also want to be clear that does not mean uh, it drives me a little batty when I hear CISOs say, if we just had good hygiene, all the problems would stop. Well, I agree that security really boils down to about like 15 core principles of like just not, right? I also don't think that's true. I think their problems are still going to happen. People make mistakes. We need backstops. Like just doing the fundamentals. If that was ever enough, then like no bad things would happen to good companies and things like that. Um, but I do think we need to look to simplify in our industry a lot.
Yeah, lot to think about and comment on there. I want to maybe look at this from where was I going to go with this? The Because one of the other things we talked about that I want to touch on was the idea that, and I alluded to it a little bit, tons of problems being identified by vendors.
Yes.
Some solutions tackling a problem, some solutions looking for a problem, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so to your point, you might have a lot of stuff on your stack that may
Yep.
or may not being used. You maybe difficult for you to figure out which ones are valid, which ones are providing a good return. But there's no lack of new stuff coming your way. And I think one of the things we touched on, you're pretty vocal about, and I think I touched on a little bit in an article I wrote after Black Hat, was the idea if as a vendor, if you can't tell me the why,
Yes.
um, it's going to be hard for me to listen to you and figure out how and where you fit in.
Yes.
Um, and that was really in the context of a lot of the AI stuff we were hearing as well. They can't explain. We have AI,
Hmm.
but we can't explain why and or how it works or where
But
it's
it's
going to fit
there.
in.
The
Yeah,
letters, they're in the
exactly.
name.
We have it. So it doesn't have to be about AI, but just your general thoughts on how how that presentation works and how do you as a CISO kind of filter the stuff that matters, because there may be a nugget in there, right? Maybe something really does connect to that principle and it's going to make your life easier and the environment
Mhm.
safer and reduce complexity and all that. So I don't know your thoughts. I'll stop rambling.
Yeah. I think there's three critical mistakes vendors make, especially having, I'm the CISO, but I've been a CISO at vendor companies for several years now. Um, so one is like, you need to be able to describe your value prop and how you are different in 30 seconds. If you can tell me about all the cool magic and different technical things your tool can do, but you can't tell me what problem you're solving for me or what solution you have to my problem, you don't have value. You've built cool tech seeking a problem. I am not investing in you to find problems for you to solve, right? Um, and I love the pitches of kind of the everything machines that I get, right? Like, just give me access to all the data and I'll do magic for you. And it's like, why? Why would I give you that? What is the benefit? Um, and I've seen really bad benefits when you press there, right? Like, oh, we can block this like one particular type of email. Okay, like great. What's that's a risk
We
profile I
can
want.
protect that laptop you don't care about, Peter.
There you go, right? Like it's and I think that's like the second mistake follows that, which is when they can't find a problem, instead of listening and understanding whether or not I have a problem that their tool can solve, they instead try to tell me that I have a problem, which is always fun when I get a LinkedIn message telling me about, don't you hate how long your GRC takes, or don't you hate this, that, and the other? And it's like, you, again, going back to our earlier conversation, your problems are not my problems. My problems are not your problems. We all have different problems. If you as a vendor are going to start telling me what problems I have, I'm instantly tuned out because you're not interested in partnering with me. And I think that's the third thing. I think, when we met, we had a conversation about like, how do you get a CISO's attention? How do you sell to a CISO? And it's actually funny because in my travels in the past week, I met someone else who had a somewhat similar background to me, and it kind of worked on both the like vendor and having to be selling and face of and consulting, and then like also being sold to and everything else. And we were talking about the fact that like the number one like top people we've worked with in our career are people who literally would like meet us and be like, hey, let me know if there's anything I can do. And you're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And they're like, no, 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 really. Like, I get it. It's a community. I want to help. Right. We're looking for partners as CISOs. And I know now I'm going to get like 50 million LinkedIn messages that are like, I just want to help. Right. But,
Right.
but realistically, demonstrate to me that you care about partnering and building a relationship and wanting to help. Because when I do have that emergency and things do go to crap, because that is part of my job, I need to know that you're going to be there and you're going to actually sincerely be there and help. One of the grossest things to me, and I will put, hopefully I'm going to, I don't know, Sean, you're dragging things out of me.
I
You're getting
am.
me in trouble
Uh,
here, but like
I'm on the hook with you here. So
some of the um, partner organizations that I very much like to participate in, and I've seen it kind of fade away mostly, but it's like one of the things that kills me is like there are events and like partnership organizations, and you'll stop being a CISO because you leave a company you don't like, and like you're not a CISO for like 3 months or stuff, and they'll be like, no, we've had a relationship with you for 5 years, but until you have that buying power back, good luck,
mm,
bye. And it's
wow,
like, um, okay, right?
that
Like,
is that is gross. Gross is a good word for that,
right?
Peter.
And you're like, well, wait a second, but I've still got 20 years left. I'm gonna be that guy again in 3 months.
Right.
Boy, did you just make a mistake, right? And I think that that is just an incredibly important thing because um, people often think that uh, you know being getting a business deal done is transactional. And in general, I can tell you, and maybe I don't know everything in the world, but I can tell you I've done a lot of business in my life, and transactional business deals, it's not a way to build business. Putting that opinion aside, it's definitely not a way to build business with people who are holding the bag when everything goes to shit.
Right. Yeah. There's so much in there, and yeah, I see a different side of it. Of course, I was building and working, building stuff for vendors and bringing them to market and selling it and all that, and kind of help a lot of vendors with some of their go to market and positioning. And I, to your point, the transaction, right?
Yes.
How long how long is the sales cycle? And how quickly can you push that through? How quickly can you find the person who owns that and close that deal? That's probably what you're seeing from the vendor's perspective. I see it on the other side of the transaction, which is how many leads can we get to
Yeah.
translate into potential deals, and it's so numbers driven that
Yes.
it I feel for the folks that really have to deal with this because it's the way they make their living. Yet
Well,
in reality, it does boil down to trust and partnership and relationship and
I
being
think
there
that
when things go wrong.
the best encapsulated story is the person I met, and I'll change some details because it's his story. But like, basically, he was working for a company, and someone needed his product, and they worked in like a kind of like a charitable organization that did some really nice stuff for like children, and they simply could not like afford the product, right? And so he discounted it down as much as possible, and they came to him and they're like, we love the product but we just can't afford it. And he looked at the price and the costing, and he realized that the most expensive part of the price was like the pro serve that was necessary to like get this thing stood up. And he went to a bunch of folks he knew, and he asked them to basically volunteer the pro serve like on their own hours, and he got like approval to basically write that out of the contract. and that like essentially they would do it even though they didn't know how to do it, and like the folks would come in and do the pro serve. And he did this just because like he liked the kids, right? And this is kind of like what I'm talking about when I say like help do something, right? um and he did it, and they were like, why are you doing this? He's like, I like the kids, I want the kids to be able to like have this, I want to help you guys, right? That's like just coming from a good place. He thought nothing of it. And the person who he helped called him up when he moved and changed jobs, and he said, hey, like the person was now in charge of like a large organization. He was like, we're moving the whole large organization to the cloud. And he's like, okay, you want me to fill out an RFP? And he's like, no, there's no RFP. Give me a price, you're going to take us to the cloud. And then he was like, look, from then on it was like anytime he'd go somewhere. And look, I have contacts like that, all CISOs do, right there. That's what I think people don't understand, who are kind of, these SDRs and BDRs and people who are trying to get. There are people who are on the sales side who are legitimate friends, who I go and visit, who I'll hang out with, who I'll have beers with, who I will call when I go and get my next CISO job and my next CISO job, because I trust them. And because when things, even when they aren't going to get a deal, they're going to help me. Even I've actually had one salesperson who I'm friends with literally look at what I needed to do and go, you know what? We're worse at this than our competitor. You actually really need our competitor. Now I'll never say who that was, because I love that person. I don't want anything bad to happen to him, right? But that is a trust mechanism that is critically important as a CISO, because at the end of the day, if you sell me snake oil, if I can't trust you, if you disappear in the dark of night when I need you, it's not just me, it's all the other people, employees, customers, everyone else who I am responsible for protecting, that you're letting down. So my barrier to doing business with you is higher than a lot of other departments in a company, because look, as a CISO, failure happens, but my job is to avoid it as much as humanly possible.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I'm just thinking of, I mean, there's so many technologies and new solutions, and they're all, well, I say all, that they're looking for a way to, they want to help, right? I think, yes, people are they start up a business, but it's usually driven by, I see a problem, or
Yes.
I see a new way to look at this. I'm going to build something, and hopefully I can connect it in a certain way. Some companies pivot, some whatever. I think ultimately they want to help, but especially young SDRs, they don't know how to help beyond selling what they have to sell. This is what I have. Hopefully, it meets a need, and I trust my organization to deliver value in the area that I'm selling to you. But beyond that, I don't know. Do they have the knowledge of the rest of what you're dealing with to be helpful?
See, but I think that is, for some reason, we've decided as a society that an SDR's job is to talk. An SDR's job
Right.
is to listen, right? And I can't tell you how many organizations I've worked in where like the worst of the worst of the SDRs usually have high numbers in like gross contacts and like quote unquote leads. But when you actually look at like, I'm not going to use like the terms to confuse people, but when you actually look at like lead qualification and like, can this person buy the product? Are they actually interested? Are they just trying to get you off the phone, etc.? It's like the number's up here, and then when you actually qualify, the number comes down here, and they're actually quite at the bottom. And the people who are often the highest in qualified leads actually have lower numbers of contacts and gross contacts and outreach. And they usually have a lower number of incoming leads, but that's because they're taking time with the folks on the phone to qualify and find the leads that are qualified. And look, to some extent, sales is a numbers game. But I often think that like if you need an incredibly high volume of SDR outreach to sell your product. I'm sorry, but I have news for you. One of three things is happening. The good one is the market's not ready for your product. That's rare. The second one is your product's not very good and it's not getting a lot of attention for that reason. And the third one is you have the wrong ICP and you're not targeting the right people and you don't understand your market. And the problem that I have there with all three of those is the root of all of those problems is that someone above the SDR also didn't take the time to outreach and listen. And so you have this systemic rolling problem of folks who don't listen and are trying to prescribe a problem onto a population and say, I know you have this problem. I can fix this problem. I know you have, which everyone loves to be told what problems they have in life. It is a fan favorite.
Fan favorite. Uh, I'm going to quit very quickly. Two stories I think is relevant. I try not to talk too much, let my guests talk, but two stories are relevant. I hear. I think so. One back in the day, Y2K timeframe. Everybody looking at this particular world of everything's going to crash on the
Mm-hmm.
turn of the year, turn of the century, and we had a huge platform, the company I was working for, and it could do everything. It was GRC before it was GRC with IT managed, ITSM built in all this stuff. And what we found was that if we just changed what we're looking for, what we're hearing from our customers, we realized it wasn't just about which machines are going to fall over. It turned into where can you find the machines that are having hard drive failures, lack of memory, um, issues connecting to the network, or whatever it was at the time that was important, and which of those were due to be replaced in your sale or your renewal cycle, so you can make the best purchasing and budgeting
Yeah.
decision, not just be prepared for Y2K. So it was a very financially driven thing, and customers like, this is cool. You helped me solve a problem that we didn't know we had, but it's very specific in a way. You weren't selling a big platform. You were selling, here's how you're going to go and buy new machines that are going to solve the majority of your challenges. Of course, Y2K didn't happen, but then so the other story I want to highlight, and maybe some of your thoughts if you have another story, but I'm not going to mention who, but I was with some customers recently for a company, and a lot of them described use of the solution in a certain way. And if a majority of those people that I heard from then said, when this vendor removed this blocking point and helped us get from A to B, our world opened up. We were able to expand to C, D, E, F, and G in the solution and become more successful in our management of the challenge that they're trying to solve. And so instead of what I was hearing, and hearing from them is, if the company or the vendor would help me overcome this challenge, which isn't a problem that the product's solving, it's a problem with the product in my
Yeah.
environment,
Yeah.
we could be so much more successful together. Versus the vendor just pushing, well, you need C, D, E, and F now because you've been on A and B for 3 years. Why can't you? And I don't know. It just seemed really strange to me that that wasn't seen when I heard this story.
I think that, look, having been an entrepreneur, right? Um, Being an entrepreneur is like riding the most hellacious roller coaster that exists in the world, right? I've actually coached and advised entrepreneurs, and I've said, if you're not like once a quarter sitting in your chair in the dark at night, kind of quietly crying, and you can't choose which of the six reasons why you're crying, like you might not be pushing hard enough, right? Like it is, there's a brutality
Yes.
to it. Um, and I think because of that, some of the brutality and some of the um you're birthing a baby, right? And no one likes to have their baby called ugly. But I think that if you're not willing to have your baby called ugly by folks who really know what babies should look like, um, then you're probably going to end up handing someone like a baby cat, and they're going to be like, that's not what I want. Right? Like, that's not, that
Right.
don't look like a human. What is that?
Right.
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 And so I think there is this mental trick that you have to take where, look, there's a lot of bad feedback you get as an entrepreneur, but you have to understand the people and find the customers who provide good feedback. And you have to outreach and find people in your circles, beg, borrow, and steal, and get people to mentor you or work with you who can help you guide the product, who are willing to share their knowledge with you. And don't get me wrong, like, one of my entrepreneurial ventures was a media company. We literally hid expletives and changed like two things in a layout. And I will, like, to me, this comment still lives with me because it's just so amazing. And quote, whoever did this, it's probably the CTO. That was me, right? And I'm like, yes, that's yes, that is, those are equivalent, right? Like, you can't use certain expletives now have like dollar signs in them. So that exists, and you get that as an entrepreneur, right? And you're going to get a lot of stuff like that, but you have to be Teflon to that, and you have to ferret out the people who are really going to help you um target your problem space, right? Because what you're trying to do as an entrepreneur, which is the trick and why listening is so important, is, like I said at the beginning of this call, and I did not intend for this to go full circle, but it kind of works out perfectly, Sean. So,
There we
hey,
go. Look at that.
um, your problems are not my problems, are not the next person's problems, but there is overlap between all those problems. And what you, as a vendor, if you want to have a product that's really going to explode, is you are listening to your different customers and to the different people who are willing to talk to you, and you are looking for that overlap. And that's also, FYI, for everyone listening, why platforming tends to fail so badly. And it's one of the worst things you can do as an early vendor, is to try to build too much and go too wide too early, because you need to spend time finding that core overlap and really finding how to like spread out from that core overlap, so that you are starting to add value and solve that problem a little bit for everyone, and then it grows into fully solving that problem for all those customers. And if you don't listen, finding that overlap is really, really hard. And so you might understand something or have seen something that you think is a problem that's 5% overlap with 30% of the people. And I don't know math really quick, but that's not a good number of people to be selling to, right?
No.
So you have to figure out what that is. And that's why, like, it goes back to um the sales journey. um I think the other thing that lacks is, going back to the numbers games, those leads that don't qualify. There's often very little feedback gathered as to why they're not qualifying.
Right.
And the leads that don't qualify, it's like the old, plane in World War II. It's
Yeah.
where the parts that aren't shot, those are the ones we
Yeah.
have to protect, right? It's the same thing. It's like, these are the leads that aren't qualifying. Why aren't they qualifying? And in theory, should they be qualifying?
Hmm.
Right? If you're talking to a company that's $1 billion company, and they're saying, I have no budget for that, it's not that doesn't get marked as they can't afford us. That's why they're not qualified. There's a problem there,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. It certainly
Yeah.
does. And the whole, I mean, we could talk for an hour on platforms, I think, as well. I think platforms is a VC problem, right? They want a company, they're investing in a company, they'll have a good return. They want to be the platform that everybody plugs into. But as a CISO, you don't have a platform problem. You have a you have a particular problem that
Yes.
maybe one day might be part of a platform. But there's so many vendors building platforms, and then they're one little piece of that,
Yes.
with the hopes that they'll be the base that everything else sits on, and they'll get a nice return for their investors.
I, to,
Yeah.
It's a weird thing to me
Hmm.
because if you look at most other technology, it's like you look at a plane, right? A plane is a large, complex thing that needs to operate. United, or even going to like Boeing or Airbus, they don't build all the parts. They put them together, right? So it's like, even as a VC, controversial. I friends with lots of VCs, but I'll be controversial for a minute. Like, even if you're a VC, if you want to build a platform, go out and build a portfolio of companies that can work with each other and complement each other, and then help co-sell them to customers and say, hey, these guys they all know each other, they all work with each other, they're all highly integrated. Look, everything works together, magic, right? But then if I don't need two of your companies, I don't have to pay for something I don't need and I don't want, and is going to look at your product as though some part of it is not functioning for me, and therefore I should get rid of it and find something that fits what I need. Right? So it's like
Yeah.
there are solves to these problems. And look, I'm not a VC, so I'm sure there are barriers to doing that, but like, we work in the world of invention.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Well, I've seen a few investment firms do something close to that, and they actually use a lot of the technology themselves. Um, so they could actually understand this is the stuff we have. Here's how it works together or doesn't. Here's how we're going to guide our portfolio, and then we have a common
yeah,
message to share. Um, Rare, I think,
it is.
and
It's
and
rare.
probably very different risk model from an investor perspective too. So you have to,
Yeah.
and sure, I guess somebody has to pay for it all. Somebody somewhere, up front
Someone.
or up front or at the back end. Peter, I can keep chatting with you forever. We didn't really get into AppSec. Maybe we can chat about that in another time. But
Yeah.
so good to see you, my friend, and
Likewise.
enjoy being grounded for the next little bit anyway,
Yes.
and for the next travels. But yeah, thanks a million. So good to meet you and to have this chat. And everybody listening, thanks for joining us. And yeah, put all your arrows toward me. Don't shoot him at Peter.
That's
He's just being honest with you.
You can shoot them at me. It's fine.
There we go. Thanks everybody for listening, watching. Do subscribe, share with your friends and enemies, and we'll see you on the next episode of Redefining Cybersecurity. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks.